The president who promised to bring America back says he is still coordinating with the Taliban and admits the United States government still does not know how many Americans are stranded behind enemy lines. Good evening, I'm Leland Vittert. Regrettably, today's news out of Afghanistan and from the White House about Afghanistan keeps getting worse. Here are the facts. The White House does not know how many Americans are left in Afghanistan. They say they might tell us tomorrow. President Biden won't commit to keeping troops on the ground till every American is out. And the administration continues to bow to Taliban demands. Those America promised to rescue from certain death by the terrorist regime in Kabul now have their own message for the president.
Mr. Biden, you did this, you planned this, you made the deal with the Taliban. This is the consequences of it. This is the repercussions of it. Mr. Biden, it's your ill calculation. You were against Trump, now we are against you.
Those people fought and risked their lives for America. Now we're leaving them in Afghanistan. Yesterday, the CIA director flew to Kabul for a negotiation with the Taliban, but evidently it didn't accomplish much. The terrorist group is still blocking roads to the airport, and the U.S. Embassy has reportedly told U.S. citizens to stay put. Here is the Taliban spokesman today.
They can take all people, they can evacuate all people, but we will not allow Afghans to leave, and we want to extend that deadline.
Of course, the United States promised to get thousands of Afghans out because they fought alongside U.S. troops and, as we've reported, face near certain death and torture at the hands of the Taliban.
The completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who were transporting out and no disruptions to our operations.
Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin commanded Delta Force and planned rescue missions like those that might be necessary for rescuing Americans stranded in Afghanistan. We're going to get his perspective in a minute, but we start with Tyler Pager, White House reporter for The Washington Post. Tyler, appreciate you being with us. As you looked and listened to President Biden, it seems like the White House policy more focuses on meeting the deadline of August 31st than getting Americans and Afghans out. Fair?
So the president today expressed confidence that they would be able to complete the mission by August 31st, but said that they would have contingency plans in case that did not happen. Obviously, there's a lot of criticism from lawmakers, from allies. He met with the G7 today and with veterans about the uncertainty about completing that mission. And so it remains unclear whether that is going to
it's interesting,
be accomplished.
Do you understand from the White House what the mission is? Because it seemed the goalposts seem to keep changing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're still unclear about is that exact number, as you referenced. The White House has said they have evacuated more than 70,000 people at this point, but they have not provided clarity on the exact number of people that are remaining. We're expected to hear from Secretary of State Tony Blinken tomorrow with more updates on that specificity, but that is something that we're still waiting to get more clarity on.
As we look at what the American people are seeing, they're clearly taking note. This is a poll, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I know the people at the White House have. Approval numbers, July 27th, 52.6%. Approval rating today, 41%. Does the White House realize what a disaster this is, and are they worried about it?
I think, the White House is concerned about the situation on the ground. I think if you talk to them publicly, they are never going to talk about the politics of the situation. They are focused on the mission, but obviously there are concerns in the Democratic community, on the Hill, in the larger Democratic ecosystem about what this means for Biden's approval ratings and heading, we're still many months away from the midterms, but gearing up for what is usually a tough midterm for the incumbent president. So I think there are undoubtedly concerns both on the ground in Kabul about completing the evacuation.
I haven't talked to anybody in my sourcing, I don't know if you have, that's outside the administration groupthink that thinks, I put it as a question, I haven't talked to anybody. Have you talked to anybody outside of the administration groupthink that believes you can get every American and all of the Afghans who are in danger out by August 31st?
I mean, I'm not on the ground in Kabul, so I don't have, Yeah,
but you got great sources. Have you talked to anybody who's said that?
I think inside the administration, they're confident of that. I think, they're confident that they are going to complete the mission. But to your point, there's a lack of clarity about what that mission is. Is it every single vulnerable Afghan? Is it all the Afghan allies, the SID?
Forgive me if I'm wrong, Tyler, but when the president walked off today, he wouldn't even guarantee that every American got out, right?
So he has guaranteed over the past few days in the speeches that he did that any American that wanted to leave would be able to. I think, we're waiting for tomorrow for more clarity. I've been pressing my sources to try to get that number of how many Americans are left. That is an answer that we don't have. And so it's hard to exactly judge whether that's going to be accomplished given the lack of information we have.
Tyler, we'll continue to read your stuff in the Washington Post. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, with that, we bring in Lieutenant General retired Jerry Boykin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, 36 years in the Army, commanding Delta Force for some of those. General, if I'm an American trapped in Afghanistan, any idea what happens to me after September 1st?
No, you better head for a border. You better hope that you can find somebody that will guide you to a border and that you can get across another border, because there aren't going to be any Americans in Afghanistan to go and get you, to rescue you. And Leland, a couple of things here. First of all, the president has raised the bar. He has changed what he said in the beginning about getting every American out, every American that wanted to go. And now it is, after the 31st, there will be people left behind. And that's what I read from what he said today. The second thing is, if you don't know how many Americans...
Forgive me for interrupting, General. You don't even need to read that. It was Admiral Kirby, the spokesperson of the Pentagon, who says we're going to get as many Americans out as we can before August 31st. Never said every American. It was interesting, and you say very rightly that things have changed in the past 48 hours. The only real event that we understand that has happened in the past 48 hours is the CIA director flying into Kabul and meeting with the head of the Taliban. You have to feel like, based on the policy changes that happened after that, is the Taliban now running things?
Yes. Yes.
And American policy as well?
Yes, the Taliban is in complete control there. Listen, when the CIA director Burns went into this so-called negotiations, it was not a negotiation because he had nothing to negotiate with. You got 7 elements of national power, like diplomacy, military, economics, intel, and he didn't have any of those to put on the table as a bargaining chip. So it was really a pleading with the Taliban, not negotiating with the Taliban. He was pleading with the Taliban for an extension on the end of the month deadline, and it did not work. So I am, as an American, I'm embarrassed. I'm saddened for our country. I'm heartbroken for the people that are going to be trapped inside this country. And it does not have to be this way, Leland. We created the Delta Force in 1977 to rescue hostages. SEAL Team 6 came along in 1981 to rescue hostages. And the Marine Corps developed a hostage rescue capability under Donald Rumsfeld's leadership. We have the forces. When you hear the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs say, we don't have the resources to go out and get people and bring them in, that's because you haven't deployed them. That's because you don't have permission to use them, but you have them. It's like having a Cadillac in the garage and no keys to it.
It seems very clear when they say they don't have the resources, they haven't been ordered to use them, haven't been allowed to use them. General Milley kind of alluded to that as well. This caught our eye from President Biden. Take a listen, and then we'll get your thoughts.
The longer we stay, starting with the acute and growing risk of an attack by a terrorist group known as ISIS-K, an ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, which is a sworn enemy of the Taliban as well. Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians.
Seems as though he's more worried about ISIS-K than he is about getting Americans out.
Yeah, I don't know what he's thinking. I am at the point now where everything that comes out of the White House I'm skeptical of, and I think most Americans are too. I would like to see the president succeed in this, and I really mean that. But it's too late now for him to succeed. This has been such an abysmal failure that he can't succeed. Well, just try from this point on to get it right. Get somebody in there that can go out and bring these people in. You're not going to do it by the end of this month. You're not going to do it.
You're not going to do it by the good graces of the Taliban either, is what it sounds like you're saying.
No, you're not. You're not. You're going to have to go get them. And that is, look, if I was one of those Americans out there, I would expect my government to go all out to come and get me, to help me, not to leave me behind. It's a national ethos. Leave no man behind. It's a national ethos. It's not just
not only are we leaving Americans behind, we're leaving people who fought and were wounded on the battlefield for us behind. We leave the Afghan interpreters behind. You're right. Well, the Brits and the French are going out to get at people. We're not. So, General, we appreciate it. I wish we could have more positive conversations. Come back and talk to us often, though, sir.
I will, Leland.
Good to see you.
Good.
All right. We are now hearing the quiet part out loud. Personal freedoms be damned. The unvaccinated shouldn't have a choice. And no, this isn't a warning from some right-wing conspiracy theorist, but yet it's coming from seemingly one of the most liberal members of society, White House Chief Medical Advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I know I respect people's freedom, but when you're talking about a public health crisis that we've been going through now for well over a year and a half, the time has come. Enough is enough. We've just got to get people vaccinated.
At what cost? Bob Bianchi is an attorney with vast experience defending Americans who find themselves on the wrong side of the government. Dr. William Schaffner is an expert on infectious diseases at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he teaches the subject as well. Bob, be with you in 1 second. Dr. Schaffner, does it make your job harder when somebody in your profession goes from providing medical thoughts and advice to advocating for policy?
Well, obviously, science is developed into policy. And what we have seen is now that this Delta variant has changed the nature of the war against the virus. You know, at the moment, we have depended upon a volunteer army, but Delta changed things. We now need to institute a draft, just as we do in any war. And we have to draft people into being vaccinated.
Drafts are
every day. We have 1,000 people dying.
Doctor, forgive me for interrupting. When you say, Doctor, forgive me for interrupting. When you say draft, that's compulsory. So are you advocating that Americans be rounded up, for lack of a better term, and the 90+ million Americans who aren't vaccinated will forcibly get shots in their arms?
Leland, watch your rhetoric. I never said rounded up, but I think we as healthcare workers are mandated. The Army's mandated to get vaccines. To attend college, you have to have a certain basic immunization history. So we've done this for years and years and years. And it's quite appropriate that we ask everybody to make their own contribution on their own behalf and the behalf of their neighbors. Yes, I think we're going to need mandates in order to get up over 80% vaccinated in order to control this virus.
The question is, can we do it? For that, we turn to Bob. Where does the law and the public interest of getting people vaccinated, as the doctor talked about, Bob, and where do people who want to remain unvaccinated's rights meet?
Yeah, Leland, the doctor is 100% correct. From a legal point of view, since 1905, the Supreme Court of the United States, starting with smallpox, polio, with regard to childhood vaccines, and on we could go, has indicated that in the interest of public health and safety, the government can use its quote-unquote police powers in order to force actual compulsory vaccines and then either fine or jail an individual. And that's not what's necessarily happening right now. But that precedent back in 1905 was followed by the Supreme Court in 1922 and all the way up until this point in time. So the government doesn't have to be right. If reasonable minds can differ, the policymakers listen to the scientists, and if it's rationally related, they can have compulsory vaccines. And if the government feels that at a certain point in time that people have not done enough in order to get those vaccines, then they can mandate them. As far as those who want to get out of it, Well, right now, they're not compulsory. So as the doctor said, we're not rounding anybody up right now. They can leave their jobs. You don't have a constitutional right to a job. So right now, the government is perfectly within its rights to do the things that it's doing, up to and including compulsory vaccines. And the only exceptions, minor exceptions, would be for a medical necessity or a religious exemption. But that's going to have to be proven, and that could cause some court cases. But this one is on the government side in terms of mandates, Leland.
There's already been a lot of court cases. Florida, I'm thinking, where there's been a lot of debates. Doctor, I want to get your thought also on this. Oregon now is instituting a outdoor mask mandate once again in Oregon for busy places. Would it be better served to try and mandate more vaccines than it would be to mandate masks?
Well, Leland, every intervention that you do adds something safety. You can do the vaccines, you can do the masking, the good hand hygiene, improving ventilation, all of those things together and others increase the amount of safety and contribute to the reduction of the transmission of this virus. And depending upon the local circumstances, and it was decided by the Commissioner of Health and the governor in Oregon that there was so much transmission of this virus, they had to add this additional layer of safety in order to protect the people of Oregon.
All right. Bob, real quick before we go, we've talked a lot now about what the government can and can't do. One of the issues, though, in terms of regulation is what the government can and can't do to private businesses, because you've got some places where the government is mandating businesses mandate the vaccine. I'm thinking about New York and restaurants. And then you've got Florida, where the government is telling private businesses they can't mandate the vaccine. Which side of that case would you rather have?
I'd rather have the government can mandate it. You know, Leland, you're bringing up a great point here. You know, it's funny how people have flipped and have become civil libertarians all of a sudden. The ACLU has been fighting for individual freedoms for many years, and people revile it on the conservative end. Now, I am just a legal commentator, not a political one. But the fact of the matter is our Constitution started with the idea of states' rights and non-interference with business by way of regulations, et cetera. So the businesses can certainly do it, and the government can mandate that businesses do it for the health, safety, and welfare. So these cases that are coming up, Leland, where they're arguing that businesses have no right to mandate whether somebody's vaccinated or not, or whether they wear a mask or not, impinges on the very idea that they typically have, these folks that make that argument, that government should stay out of government, or rather business affairs. But in the end analysis, Leland, if the government feels that businesses can be mandated to do it because it's the health, safety, and welfare, they have those police powers under the Constitution. I'd rather argue on the behalf of the government under those circumstances.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Doctor, Attorney Bob, good to see you both. Thank you.
Good to see you, Leland. Thank you.
Coming up, you may have seen a headline about this, the COVID walkout that wasn't. We're going to talk to a Florida doctor who's making a plea to the unvaccinated as cases continue to rise. But first, it's not just the Democrats criticizing President Biden. The GOP is now fighting over our commitment to rescue Afghan allies. What that might mean for the GOP when we come back. We're also going to take a look into the possible Havana syndrome attack that delayed Vice President Harris's trip to Vietnam. While President Biden faces withering criticism from his own party over Afghanistan, Republicans appear ready to take some of the heat off as a rift in the GOP is forming over whether or not the United States should be keeping its word to get Afghan allies out. Here's J.D. Vance, who's a Republican running for Senate in Ohio.
Let's focus first on getting them out of Afghanistan before we say another word about the Afghan refugees. Now, Senator Sass also said that he would welcome the Afghan refugees to his neighborhood with open arms. That's very sweet of him. I'm sure a lot of liberals will say very nice things about him because he said that. But the question is not whether we help the Afghan refugees.
Vance was responding to Senator Ben Sass, who calls America's commitment to saving Afghan translators and their families sacrosanct. Vince Colonnese reports on these issues and more, editorial director of the conservative website Daily Caller, host of the Vince Colonnese Show, joining us, as you can tell, from Washington this evening. Vince, is this a real thing in the Republican Party, or is this a distraction?
Well, I think it should be it is a real thing, for one. I think it should be a real thing that we have a genuine conversation now about who gets refugee status of any kind from Afghanistan. The public in both parties has widely said for a long time that people who have served as interpreters, also known as translators, to the United States should be welcomed into the United States. But the reality of the refugee program that we have, the the special immigration visa program that we have, is that that category is actually a small category of the number of Afghan refugees who are potentially eligible right now for refugee status in the United States. That means, like, we should definitely have a real debate about this. You know, earlier this year.
Is the time to have the debate, though, while the Taliban is chasing people through the streets and beating them as they try to get to the airport?
Well, it's critical to have it now. Unfortunately, this timeline didn't have to happen this way, but it is happening this way because we're dealing with a country that has a small paper trail, which makes it really hard to actually conduct the kinds of background checks of meaning. If you bring people to the United States and then say, we're going to continue to do the background checks here, that doesn't serve us well because this is a collapsing country. You can't, in good faith, send anybody who's here, even in the application process, back to Afghanistan. So yes, unfortunately, that's the hand we've been dealt, and you have to grapple with this. Earlier this year, the Biden administration found that the Iraqi refugee program yielded at least 4,000 fraudulent cases, and they've begun investigations into over 100,000 more.
So we can all agree. I just want to understand. We can all agree that all of the people who have special immigrant visas, meaning the people who were translators and helped Americans, should be able to come. That's not a conversation you want to have.
Yeah, the interpreters, I think, is the broad agreement, right? That's where everybody agrees. There are other categories of special immigrant visas within Afghanistan.
And you think,
include, people who helped.
In real time, though, how do we have this conversation? How do you try to debate right now at the Kabul airport? Well, you, sir, we think you're okay, and you're not.
Right.
Is that good for Republicans to be in arguing about that right now? As Democrats seem to have.
Well, I think it's important. And the point that J.D. Vance was making is we have to think first and foremost about American citizens, critically. And that should be, I think, the obligation of any administration, regardless of political party. The situation in Afghanistan right now is that we have rescued 3,800, approximately, according to Daily Caller reporting tonight, my outlet, 3,800 American citizens, according to U.S. government officials. There are still 8,000 more American citizens not yet rescued, and we are looking at a week in order to get them out. So our obligation, first and foremost, is
terrible,
to them.
But in order to get those 8,000 people out, you have to have the political will to go and get people with force, which the Biden administration doesn't seem to be willing to do. The question would be, so should we have planes sitting there empty and not taking Afghans out on the off chance that these Americans can get to the airport? I'm confused where the logic goes.
Yeah, I think, again, it's really important that we welcome people to the country, but we do it with as good a vetting process as we can. I don't think, and I just don't think that the debate that's being had on the right now is, how quickly can we get these people in? Ben Sass signaling, all these people have to come. We made a promise to them, but how expansive is that promise? And I don't think anybody's really defining that.
Well, you make a good point in terms of the promise sort of keeps expanding. And there's obviously a lot of people now who are claiming that status because they realize how difficult things are. This was some rhetoric that caught my eye from Charlie Kirk. Joe Biden intentionally let it fall apart in Afghanistan because he wants a couple of 100,000 more Ilhan Omars to come into America to change the body politic permanently. This is a messaging question. This seems like a real gift to Democrats to hand them this when Democrats have such a foreign policy disaster on their hands.
Yeah, what I resent is the idea that people are looking to score political points off of this at all, other than to make the basic case that you should lead the country, and you have shown a track record to do that. Right now, the Biden administration clearly isn't, and that's among both Democrats and Republicans, as you see his approval rating falling in both camps. And that's a sign of incoherence, I think, and not a good one. And the Biden administration needs to move quickly to solve this because the Taliban is straight up threatening the United States if we're not out of there by August 31st. And right now, the Biden administration seems to be playing along with those threats.
I was going to say, the Biden administration seems to be saying, yes, Mr. Taliban will be gone by August 31st. It's what I got from his speech. We're going to have a little bit more on that later. Vince, always a great conversation. Good to see you.
Leland, thank you.
Thank you. When we come back, a possible new case of the mysterious Havana syndrome, this time in Vietnam. Remember, Havana syndrome is radio attacks on American personnel that are debilitating. We're going to tell you why that's important since Vice President Harris was showing up. Plus, we're talking to one Florida doctor who's leading the charge to get people vaccinated, but she says her important message was taken vastly out of context by MSNBC.
I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable should that become necessary. I'm determined to ensure that we complete our mission, this mission. I'm also mindful of the increasing risks that I've been briefed on, and the need to factor those risks in.
President Biden today saying he wants to have American troops out of Afghanistan by August 31st, but later refused to say he would keep troops there until all Americans are out. Michael Waltz, former Green Beret, now congressman from Florida, served several tours in Afghanistan as a Special Forces officer, knows firsthand about the dangers there. Congressman, good to see you. One of your colleagues on the other side of the building, that Senator Ted Cruz, just tweeted, "America does not take orders or deadlines from the Taliban. We will leave on our terms, not theirs, and our terms are that we've gotten every trapped American to safety." It's great that Senator Cruz said that, but it appears as though President Biden is not exactly heeding that advice.
No, it's not. Two things. We never leave Americans behind, and we don't take orders from the Taliban. But we are on the verge of doing both, Leland, and I fear we're also on the verge of a mass hostage situation that will rival anything that we saw with Jimmy Carter in 1979 and the Tehran hostage. It'll make that situation look like a sleepover compared to the hundreds to thousands of Americans trapped behind terrorist lines. That will be fantastic.
You just said, Congressman, forgive me for interrupting. You said hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
There weren't hundreds.
Hundreds to thousands.
Got it.
We cannot get a clear answer from the State Department on exactly how many Americans. And that's, Leland, that's not just in Kabul, but there's also a number outside of Kabul. And for reasons that still aren't clear to us, our special operators are not authorized to go get them. We are basically saying, make your way to Kabul or you'll be left behind by August 31st. And oh, by the way, you have to get through dozens of Taliban checkpoints to get there. It's unacceptable. It's un-American.
You've worked in White Houses and been an advisor to principals as these decisions are being made. Is this a case where President Biden sort of really doesn't care how you get to the end, which is American troops gone by August 31st, and the consequences and whatever happens between now and then doesn't really matter?
It appears to be. I don't know if there's kind of a heartlessness there or just clueless or both. But there is a total divorce, Leland, from what Biden is saying publicly and then what we're being briefed in classified settings like we were today with the Director of National Intelligence, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Blinken and Austin. So, we're hearing that the Defense Department is prepared to stay beyond August 31st, that they are prepared to go get Americans proactively without waiting. The intelligence community is saying al-Qaeda will come back and intends to come back. It's not a matter of if, but when. But then we go to the White House with Biden and it's everything's fine and the mission to leave is going to happen no matter what, regardless of the consequences. This problem is going to follow us home and America is less safe because of it.
Former Admiral Kirby, now Mr. Kirby at the Pentagon, said this today. Take a listen.
We're trying to get as many out as we can. And so if we can exceed what our previous expectations were, and we have over the last couple of days, that's a good thing, and we're going to continue to drive at that.
So is he preparing America for Americans being left behind?
Yeah. Yes, that's how I understand it, is that they're going to get out who they can. But at the end of the day, this stubborn, irrational, made-up deadline from Biden is what's driving our policy. And of course, the Taliban are seizing on that. Having sat across from the Taliban and negotiated with them before, they understand strength and they take advantage of weakness. And right now, I think they smell weakness in our policy. And that's not just a talking point. That's how they operate.
What do you make of the administration's sort of focus in President Biden's speech, both on the risks of this and on specifically ISIS-K and the risks from them of keeping Americans on the ground? Yeah,
so one thing to understand in Afghanistan, it's a bit different from Iraq. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda are married at the hip, but the Taliban and ISIS are opposed. And what we're seeing is a growing threat of a ISIS suicide bomber, ISIS vehicle-borne, car bomb hitting our perimeter the longer that we stay there as a spoiler. Now, the Taliban have made it clear that they will also turn on us past August 31st. But between now and then, there is a growing threat of ISIS ignoring the Taliban agreement and hitting us. Oh. And that's what Biden is saying. He's factoring in his calculus of staying beyond the 31 deadline. Our message needs to be, there will be consequences to you. There will be bombs on foreheads, and we will kill you if you get in between us and saving Americans, because that's how they understand their risk and their calculus. But instead, we're reacting to them. We're being dictated to by the terrorists, and it's just unbelievable and unacceptable.
Congressman, you've been a strong advocate for getting Americans out and getting our Afghan translators out as well. We appreciate you coming on, sir. Good talking to you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
More than 75 doctors staged a walkout to protest the number of COVID patients coming to the hospitals who have not been vaccinated.
The doctor walkout that wasn't. That's according to the doctors themselves, who yesterday found their message being distorted after a pre-shift press conference intended to encourage vaccinations. Jennifer Buchner organized the press conference and joins us now. Doctor, we appreciate you being with us. You heard the soundbite. Was this a walkout or not?
No, in no way was this a walkout whatsoever. It was not a protest. Walkout, protest, those were never words used. This was a community-driven press conference for doctors to come out and speak to our community and deliver a heartfelt message, urging the community to help us take control of the COVID situation in our community and get vaccinated.
I want to just clear this up, and then we're going to get on to the other issues, including why you had the press conference to begin with. But there's been this accusation that you were saying we're not going to treat unvaccinated people, or we're going to treat the unvaccinated different than the vaccinated. When we saw the headline, it caught our attention as well. Is that true?
No. Okay. Completely disturbing. And I would say fake news, false news. We are physicians. We are trained from day one in our careers to take care of patients. We take an oath. It doesn't matter to me who the patient is, what their ailment is. We would never, none of us would ever leave a patient standing out there uncared for.
You know, they say a lie can get around the world before the truth gets its clothes on. What's happened to you and your colleagues since this report?
Yeah, well, since this report, our phones have been ringing off the hook. Other colleagues of mine, same thing. Several have received death threats. People have suggested my license should be taken away. I received multiple negative Google reviews, and luckily some other physicians have come to our aid. And unfortunately, this was a message that was really supposed to be heartfelt, and it was completely twisted. And I think a complete embarrassment to healthcare workers everywhere.
Well, and an insult, really, because you guys have been really working 18 and 20-hour days for the past 18 months, taking care of all of us. I want to get to that point, because the reason you had this press conference was because of the explosion of COVID in Southeast Florida. Are we at the point where if I have a stroke or I have a heart attack in Southeast Florida, my care is going to be impacted because the hospitals are so full?
Well, I would say two things to that point. So my point, if you heard our press conference, was people with acute medical issues like stroke may be scared to come out and actually walk in the doors because they're so scared that COVID is everywhere. Now, do we have an issue where you're not going to get a bed if you have, another issue or a pressing issue at this time? No, locally, we're not at that point. But if we don't get a grasp on this in our area, the concern was that we would be. So the hope was all of these doctors coming out before their day started. We care for patients in the community. We care about our community. We're a really close-knit community. We wanted to give that message and hope that if someone saw their doctor on screen, it would encourage them to come out and get vaccinated and help us reduce the chances exactly that would happen.
Yeah, you say not yet where you are. We had some doctors on from Louisiana who said it was already happening there, that people who had heart attacks and other issues were not getting the kind of care they needed because the hospitals were so overflowed. putting these numbers up in terms of case counts in Florida. And we want to be careful when we talk about states with the highest rates of new cases, because there's a very big difference between new cases, new hospitalizations, the per capita rates, et cetera. Are things in Florida that much worse than the rest of the country in terms of hospitalizations? Because we're not hearing that.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, if you pay attention to the news, our public schools are back in session in most places, and maybe that's not the same in the Northeast and other parts of the country. So that's probably a lot of the increase we're seeing. I don't know, again, that we're at the same severity as what you're hearing about in Louisiana. Obviously, there's been a lot of news about Dallas. So even though we have a lot of cases, you know, and our hospitals are full, we're definitely not in the dire needs and short supplies as you hear in some of the other areas of the country.
All right, Dr. Jennifer Buchner from Florida. Buchner, pardon me. We appreciate you coming on, doctor, and talking with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Lots changed in Afghanistan in the past even 10 days, much less 10 years. Take a look back and see if anybody predicted this when we come back.
The completion of August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who were transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations.
President Biden there earlier talking about when American troops would leave. The Taliban has said they have to be out by August 31st or there will be consequences. Afghanistan is roughly the size of Texas, the population of California, meaning for many of the Americans stranded in the country, getting to the airport in Kabul is an impossible journey. But as we have reported, the route from Kabul downtown to the airport is also blocked by Taliban gunmen. Glenn Johnson, the political editor of Axios. Before that, he traveled to Afghanistan extensively, working for then Secretary of State John Kerry from 2013 to 2017. Pictures as proof of your travels there. Good to see you, Glenn. We appreciate it. When you were in Afghanistan between those years, was there anything on the ground that you saw that made you think one day I'm going to report on what an epic disaster this is going to be?
I wouldn't say frame it that way. I would say that just our mode of transport between the airport that's now the focus of such attention and the embassy, which we've now abandoned, was very telling. We never drove between the 2 points. We only flew by helicopter. And when we landed in a commandeered soccer field that was controlled by the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, so that we had the safest route between those 2 points. That always struck me as, you know, a pretty symbolic message about the security situation in Kabul itself.
Well, symbolic in the sense that when you were there going back and forth, you were going by helicopter because it was so dangerous, and now we're telling Americans, hey, get to the airport, we're not gonna come get you.
Yeah, I mean, we were a high-level target, you know, with a high-profile individual. You know, other people move more freely around the city, but you know, it's a pretty dangerous predicament that we're in right there right now.
America's policy seems to be changing even in the past couple of hours, because it was a couple of days ago, President Biden said, we will get every American out. Today, he wouldn't answer the question. Next 7 days, what threads is Axios going to be pulling on with the administration?
Well, I mean, I think we have to accept the reality or understand the reality of the situation. I heard Congressman Waltz talk about his perspective. He's obviously a veteran. He's been there. He's seen it. The simple reality of what we face right now, though, is that we've ceded the high ground to the Taliban. There is no Afghan government there. There is no Afghan army to speak of there, and they have the airport surrounded. And it's very clear to me that what the president is trying to do is get U.S. forces, U.S. citizens out without any further loss of life. And so he's got to almost take it on the chin here for the next couple of days to try and get them out safely, have the Taliban hold their fire, and then deal with any fallout thereafter. But his primary goal, it seems, is to get people out safely. And so, like I said, he's got to bite his tongue in the face of
you make a great point. And you said without any loss of life. There has not been a U.S. casualty yet with the operation at the airport, but aside from 2 helicopter runs, American forces haven't left the airport. The French and the Brits have. From your guys reporting at Axios, how concerned is the administration about leaving Americans behind versus taking casualties over the next 7 days?
I think they're very concerned about leaving Americans behind. That was evident from what Jen Psaki was saying, what the president was saying. You'll also notice they haven't given numbers. Tomorrow, they're going to send out the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to finally give, a specific accounting of how many people have been taken out, how many Americans remain there right now. There are some people that don't want to go no matter what, as frustrating and as dangerous as that can be. There's others who
I want to pick up on that because we've been parsing those words. When they keep saying every American who wants to get out, your reporting is that there's Americans who actually don't want to leave.
Well, there's NGOs and other people that do work there that believe in the cause of helping Afghan women. Not necessarily all of them want to leave or feel that they have to abandon the country. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying it's the reality.
That's the reality. That's fair. The other reality, and something that you've done fantastic reporting on, is the conditions that those who have been airlifted out of Afghanistan now are dealing with. We're going to put your piece up on the screen right now. And this is the conditions of people in Qatar. A living hell leaked email describes Afghan refugee conditions. So they were flown out of Afghanistan to U.S. air bases in the Gulf, and things are pretty terrible there. Is that sort of emblematic of how terribly thought out and ill-conceived and how bad the planning was on this evacuation?
I think, they went from one hell to another, and I don't think anybody was expecting a five-star hotel experience when they landed in Doha. But what we picked up from both the diplomatic security official that wrote that email and from the communications chain that he included in it from embassy staffers was a frustration with a lack of planning and unclear execution. We got people out of there after the collapse of the government and the military on August 15th, but there was no real plan for how to deal with these people or how to process them. And so they were brought into hangars that were unair conditioned. It was just putrid in there.
You worked at the State Department. No question, these are awful conditions. It seems as though these plans should have been made for months because we knew this deadline was coming and we knew there's going to be a bunch of people we had to get out.
Fair point. I mean, I think that's going to be the criticism of the administration going forward is what kind of planning. There's a number of people that were trying to get the special immigrant visas for the translators and interpreters. There was other people warning that we should pull our embassy personnel out earlier. And I think everybody in the White House assumed that there was more time, that the government would provide more room for them to maneuver. And that obviously went away in an instant.
Yeah, an instant, quite literally. Glenn, always good talking to you. Nice to see you on television. Great reporting. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Leland.
Thanks. We'll be right back. Tomorrow, the White House is supposed to tell us how many Americans they think are stuck in Afghanistan and a plan to get them out. Getting them out by that deadline of 6 days from now, even Democrats say is going to be hard. Marnie?